Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, where we bring you the latest news, issues and changes happening in the energy sector. This week, we'll take a deep dive into geopolitics and the impact of several factors on global gas markets and energy prices. Next month, Donald Trump returns to the White House. What will be the impact? Meanwhile, the Russia-Ukraine conflict rumbles on. There is an escalation in the Middle East. Volatility is ramping up and up. There is pressure within Europe as there is a political crisis in both France and Germany, with German elections looming in February. What does this have to say for the energy markets? What will be the impact? How will they be hit?
2025 is turning, or will likely turn out just a little more stressful, just tighter in terms of supply. It will be another geopolitically driven year like 2024. 2024, of course, was the Middle East. It was Russia and the Ukraine war. It was also U.S. sanctions against Russia, targeting Russia, which undermine also the Russia's attempt to become a significant player, or beyond what it is already, in the LSEG sector, of course. 2025, it's not only about Trump. There are several things. And for the time being, there are the fundamental issues, and that will mostly be related to possible delays or likely delays in projects out of the U.S. Regardless whether we can expect Trump will embrace LNG production, gas production, oil, hydrocarbons in general, we know that's already part of his plan for during the next 4 years. But it's especially going to involve LNG exports, and that's because it's the perfect way to meet Trump's global demands to lower the tariff deficit that the U.S. has with many global players, including Europe, including China, and including other significant global players. So that we know Trump will support LNG because it can be easily used in the upcoming tariff wars. The last time it happened, China cut its LNG imports completely. Will it do it now? Maybe not. In any case, the market is certainly better positioned to just reorganize the supply routes so that China doesn't buy as much U.S. LNG, but it will buy from other players, and that remains to be played out, of course. There's other issues that could affect the global gas and LNG sectors regarding Trump, of course, but it goes back to geopolitics. How he deals with the Middle East conflict will be key to global gas markets next year, because it will again depend on that and the developments in the Suez, around the Suez Canal, or around the Houthis in Yemen, of course, in the Strait of Hormuz, right in front of Iran, and with that, that could eventually involve a direct bilateral war between Iran and Israel, and that just changes the equation completely in the Middle East. But of course, Russia will remain an important issue, and we will have more supply. We already know that at least 2 LNG plants are coming online this month. In fact, by the end of the month, that's Plaquemine, and an expansion Corpus Christi in Chenier's plant. There will be more demand, and of course it remains to be seen also how China's own economy develops. That will also dictate a lot of the fundamentals and how the world manages to balance. But it will not be so different as this year. If it gets too expensive, then you will have a lot of price-sensitive players come out of the market, and there will be more available for Europe, but at a higher price. And of course, that will have also a direct impact, especially if you consider you have German elections coming up in February.
And sat with me listening to that is Wayne Bryan, Principal Associate, London Stock Exchange Group. Welcome back to the podcast, Wayne. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Yourself?
Pretty good. Now, we've heard that scene setter from Andres Cala. What's your view of the points that he was making? Are you in broad agreement?
No, I do agree in somewhat for next year. I mean, from January the 6th onwards, with Donald Trump arriving, it's going to create a whole new situation for markets. I mean, we've had a relative period of stability in terms of with the Biden government. Of course, we've had the geopolitical impacts of several wars happening, but at least we've had some stability now. With Trump coming in, you've already seen how he's working. Most people now visit in Mar-a-Lago instead of going to the White House. So that sort of transition of power seems to have already happened. And I think he just brings that uncertainty. And I think I highlighted before I joined LSEG, when I was working in gas and power trading, he used to move these markets like no one's business, just with the fact he releases information straight from his social media accounts. He doesn't really care for any sort of security concerns about what he says. He just shoots from the hip. He's now got these 4 years to, in essence, I'm going to say do what he wants, probably the wrong way to say it, but I don't think we're going to see a third Trump term, obviously. So I think now, these 4 years, he's really going to try and shape America and the world how he views it. And we all know that that's not how everyone else views the world. So I expect a lot of volatility, not just in, obviously, energy markets, because he has some impacts on that, but also in the broader sense as well. How is he going to deal with the Ukraine situation? How is he going to deal with the now explosive Middle East situation when you consider what's just happened in Syria? How is he going to sort of maintain relations or improve relations or even cut relations with Russia? There's so many uncertainties. NATO spending, I mean, there's a whole raft of areas I could go into. LNG, of course, oil and gas drilling. He's already drill, baby, drill is his, one of his sort of statements. So I think, it's going to be underscored by some Trump volatility for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll touch on those a little bit later, Wayne. But what have been the key events in 2024 for you?
There's been a lot going on. In terms of gas markets, we've had lots of concerns around storages, both in the build up to winter and then towards sort of end of last year. How we're going to sort of fill these storages is the constant narrative. One thing that's been interesting is industrial demand remains seriously suppressed. There's been some really bad economic numbers of late, and that's been a sort of recurring theme. And we thought probably it was going to rebound a little bit more, but that's been, really subdued. And the outlook isn't as rosy as we once thought for that part of the market. LNG, we've had a bit less LNG these last few months, and we've seen the impacts of that. We've had the Duncan flout situation recently where it really exposed the fragility of the European energy system in the absence of gas. What would have made up that gap? And we saw a huge withdrawal of storages, I think, last week 50. Huge, one of the biggest draws of storages we've seen. So there's just a whole lot going on. I mean, it's hard to think back exactly now to every single event, but we've now got Gazprom sanction payments. What's going on there? We've got uncertainty around, Ukrainian transit as well, and lots of stories around that. So, it's been an interesting year for sure.
I'd like to play another little clip for you, Wayne. And this is from a previous podcast with you and Tobias Federico from April. And this is what you both had to say when I asked what impact a newly installed President Donald Trump in the White House would have on the global situation and on LNG and gas. So let's just listen back now.
The thing is that it could become the worst nightmare, as you has mentioned today, and Richard, this was really great. Donald Trump is like a hand grenade throwing into the whole geopolitical risks, and we really see that. Looking into LNG, well, we might have two possibilities. One is gas first for America, because having low gas prices means an increase for their economy and the economic growth, which also means then less gas for the whole world market, and then depends on how we react in the Far East. Might well be that we will get a gas shortage in the first step, or it could be the other way around. Yeah, we will sell our gas, but on our terms, which means increasing gas prices. So both ways, I think it's quite likely to have increasing LNG prices for Europe.
So, I mean, he's a businessman. He doesn't want to cut off his nose to spite his face, does he really? I mean,
but he wants to earn money. So
yeah, exactly.
Selling the same volume at a higher price.
But you've mentioned as well before, Wayne, about potential tariffs with China that could come into play. How do you see that playing out?
As I mentioned earlier, I think it's literally a hand grenade into the sort of global geopolitical situation at the moment. And I think nothing's off the table, and that's what's concerning. I think when Trump was last in power, I was in my previous role trading. I used to have his Twitter feed up on one of my screens because
he would say things that even his team wouldn't know about, just straight to the world. And some of that was related to oil, for example. He used to move a lot on his comments. Of course, what he did with the gas market in terms of, let's just ramp up and export, tear up all of these environmental agreements, ramp up production, and let's get America back in business again. So I think you've got that impact as well. But also, like Tobias said, you've got the chance of increased prices. But back to the tariffs, of course, I've already seen, I've started to watch a few of his rallies now. I'm not a fan, by the way, but just to gauge how he is. And I've heard him mention tariffs and China's still playing us and NATO and I'll stop the... He'll walk into office with about 3,000 ideas and no one will know which way he's going to turn next. And that, for me, is the concern. And the one thing I associate with Donald Trump, volatility.
So, Wayne, the hand grenade is on the way back to the Oval Office. I mean, how do you view what you said in April now? I mean, what kind of... do you think the impact will be the same? 3,000 ideas, the main price driver for global gas could be his Twitter feed, or now his X feed. I mean, how do you view that standing or sitting where you are now?
Well, I think the tariff thing definitely was true. I'm seeing now, I think he's proposed 60% or 10% on imports into the US as well, Mexico, Canada. So tariffs is his big thing that can obviously disturb global trade. In terms of his Twitter feed impacting gas markets, not as much now, because what are his influences? I mean, yes, we know about the LNG export pause, but that really wouldn't make any difference at the moment, short term anyway. We all know he's going to roll that back, but it's not going to make any difference in the short term. We all know about the wave of LNG capacity that's coming online over the next 2 years. I think more for the terms of what he may do, he can impact how the global markets are functioning. And with the tariffs, higher costs, inflation, all these sort of things could indirectly impact the gas markets. And that's where I think he could more or less impact it. Not as direct as, for example, on the likes of oil markets, and where he's got a bit more influence in terms of the reserves and drilling, etc. So, but yes, what he will say will move the commodity complex as a whole, as we've seen before. But I don't think you can say he'll have a massive impact on the gas market, because we've got our own drivers at the moment, but he will have some small impact when you consider the relationship with other commodities.
Do you think he's going to be more predictable? I mean, you mentioned his unpredictability and these kind of 3,000 ideas. Do you expect it to be more kind of not as volatile?
I expect him to, you've seen him over recent months and just his rhetoric. And actually, I think he dialed it down a little bit when he was trying to get into the Oval Office. And now he's achieved that. I think you hear some of his recent words and you see the people that he's speaking to, and he's got a lot to do. And on the back of his promises about ending the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, which we know is impossible, and his views on the Middle East. So he's walking into a lot on his first few days. But I think as we move through the first couple of months, we'll get a better understanding of what exactly his plans are. And again, he'll throw in these odd quotes and sort of ideas that will throw people.
Absolutely. And I think, what about, you mentioned the delays in LNG products. What's the status here? What will Trump do?
Well, he said the pause on exports in terms of new facilities. Obviously, Biden put a pause on that, a temporary pause. Well, Trump's already said the first thing he'll do when he gets into office is rip that up. So that's he's already stated that several times. And like I said, it's not going to make a huge difference over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. A bit more further on, yes, maybe there'll be more LNG export capacity coming out of the United States. But as it stands, I don't look at it impacting the sort of global balance over the next sort of 12 months. More about sentiment further on.
So it's maybe when we get into 26, 27. That, yeah, absolutely. And how about China? I mean, we mentioned the tariff situation. What about Chinese gas demand, and as in terms of US supply or just generally globally?
In terms of,
Chinese gas demand. How do you see that panning out?
Well, we've seen Chinese demand at the moment is not that strong. You've seen them reselling LNG cargoes into the market. We've seen increased gas into storage facilities, obviously. But again, looking at some of the economic forecasts, it still doesn't look that rosy. And I think if there are these huge new tariffs being imposed, that's going to have an impact on production industry, etc., which could then impact demand as well.
And how about the Middle East? I mean, you mentioned here that, he's pledged to end or at least mediate some of the issues in the Middle East. How do you see this? I mean, Andres in the scene setter talked about the Strait of Hormuz, the Houthi rebels. How do you think Trump, when you throw Trump into the mix there, what do we get out of it?
Decisiveness probably is one thing I will say about him. If he's got an idea and he'll run it through, and I think that'll be one of the priorities, is to sort of cool the tensions down in that region. You've seen the recent attacks on all the Syrian infrastructure, military infrastructure, not just from Israel, but also from Turkey as well. I mean, that place is a tinderbox at the moment. It looks like the Russians are going to be withdrawn if you look at these latest satellite pictures of the activity around the bases in Syria. So I think he'll go in strong there. But again, you couldn't ask me now, what will he do? He'll try and cool things down, of course, but in what way and who will it benefit? He's already, as you know, he built the US embassy in Israel. He's obviously pro-Israel, but again, that Middle East situation is a tinderbox, and I think maybe he will, in some way, because people know. If you look at his last term, he was in dialogue with North Korea. We didn't see any weapons being tested. As soon as Trump left, Kim Jong-un took that as a sign. There's obviously lots of missile tests. There's also North Korean troops in Russia at the moment as well. So I don't think these sort of things happen with Trump in charge. But now, like I said, he's got a lot on his plate in these first few days of office. So I think I'm not the only one, but I think most of the world is waiting to see what his actual approach will be. I mean, he's obviously a changed person. We're talking 4 years. Things change. So let's see. We wait and see what version of Trump we're going to get. But like I said before, indeed, I still think whatever happens, this gentleman brings a lot of uncertainty and volatility across global markets.
And Wayne, sort of moving on to another conflict. So when we look at the Russia-Ukraine, the Ukrainian PM, Denis Shmyhal, announced only this week that the deal allowing Russian gas to transit through the country will not be extended beyond the end of the year. What's your view here?
Our base view is flows won't continue. The existing contract won't be renewed is our first view. And now there's a lot of talk of different options. Azerbaijan, we've heard stuff about Poland now coming into the mix, and extra LNG and then supply from Poland. So there's a whole raft of ideas. You've seen, I think it was Italy, Austria, and Slovakia. They sent this letter to the EU saying that, please do something. I think the point is, and again, we're speaking with my colleague Yuri, who I think was speaking to Lawrence the other day about this, and I think the point is, Ukraine have stated something where they said no Russian gas. So if some compromise can be met where it's not Russian gas, maybe it's sold to another buyer and then put through as non-Russian gas, would that be palatable? I don't know. But one thing you do know is there won't be a continuation of Russian molecules through Ukraine. And if you look at the recent auctions, there's been no capacity purchased. So again, looking at, I think, the Gazprom supply through Ukraine into Moldova, that is going to cease, and there's so far been no capacity booked. And I think Gazprom come out and said they're looking at alternative ways to supply the Transnistria region with about 3 MCM per day of gas. So that's also a sign as well.
I just want to play you another little clip from a previous guest. This is what Nadia Martin-Wigan, who's director of Sverrisson Capital Hedge Fund, told us about this situation back in September.
There is within the European Union a lot of pushback about allowing this gas to go forward. However, we currently have a deal potentially being negotiated with Azerbaijan where they could be the go-between Russia and Ukraine. Specifically, Azerbaijan would supply that gas, not the entirety of 15 BCM, which is the volumes we're talking about at stake here, could be fulfilled by Azerbaijani domestic production. That only rose 0.6 BCF in the last year on year. And we've either spare capacity at less than 5, if you include them and Kazakhstan. So there would have to be a complicated swap agreement between Russia and Azerbaijan, meaning that Russia provides the gas, to Azerbaijan, and then Azerbaijan then exports more of its own gas instead of using it domestically to Ukraine. However, there's also pushback on the pipelines with Gazprom on whether Azerbaijan would actually physically send that gas or if it would actually be coming from Russia. So this is where it's complex. And of course, if we're still using Russian gas, then it defeats the whole purpose, hence the pushback within the European Union. However, given the difficulty in the economic situation, in particular for Germany, there are members of the group and the direct recipients of this Ukrainian gas that would very much like this sort of deal agreed with Azerbaijan.
What's your view here, Wayne? Do you agree with that view? Do you think there will be some kind of deal brokered to meet the needs of those of the member states that you mentioned?
Well, I think the main challenge here is I think she highlighted it very well, is the political, selling this politically. We can talk about swap deals. We still know where the molecules are coming from, right? This may placate Ukraine, still not sure about that. But again, the transit fee situation might come into, I think it's 2 to 3% of their income comes from transit fees. So I think the political sell is quite hard on this. We talk about this, reducing our over-reliance on Russian gas, etc. We've been making steps. LNG is a different story. So I think politically it might face some hurdles, but this is something, again, I think we're here in 2019 with lots of will they, won't they, will they, won't they. We expected they would, and actually we did well because of that, and obviously they did. And again, I've mentioned this before, but I've been in this market long enough to, you can never be surprised. So as much as the view from our team, the gas team at LSEG, is flows won't continue, there might be some kind of fudge, and there's still time to do that. So for me at the moment, 70-30, no, but there's a chance, I think, of something will be agreed. But the market's priced in. It won't, obviously, if you look at the market now, there's been some rumours and there's been lots of smoke. And that's, again, what there's no smoke without fire, as they say. And there's been a lot of smoke over recent months about a workaround. And as we both just mentioned, this plea from these member states is kind of telling, really, and putting the pressure on. So I'm sure there's a lot of dialogue going on now. And we've still got where are we today? It's the 19th. We've still got 11, 12 days to go. So I'll be keeping an eye on the news for sure and looking at what potentially could happen. But as it stands at the moment, the market is not pricing that in. And
so when you're tucking into your Christmas dinner, you're unwrapping your presents, will you have one eye on your screen there, Wayne, to see? Because do you expect kind of shenanigans to happen over Christmas?
Not quite on Christmas Day. I don't think my family would allow that. But yeah, I'll be taking a look at keeping an eye on things over the Christmas period, because it is a pivotal moment. Even though, like I mentioned, we expect it not to continue and the market has already priced that fact in, pressures may succumb on neither side, really, and then we could see some sort of agreement.
But finding this alternative to Russian gas, especially for those countries that you mentioned, the Eastern European member states as well as Austria, Italy, that's very, very difficult. And how successful have they been in trying to wean themselves off Russian gas and finding alternative supplies?
Italy's done well, obviously through LNG. If you look at the addition of recent regasification facilities, the FSRU just arrived as well. So I think Italy's, done well. It's done really well. Similar to Poland, what they did as well. They managed to make some good moves again using LNG. So I think LNG is the gateway to that. But again, that highlights the problem, really. For LNG to arrive, we need to be at a premium, and you've seen European market will do that when it needs that LNG. Prices will rise, but again, you're paying for that additional loss of supply, but at what cost? And I think that's the question: is the cost. But we've seen some great moves considering where we were 2 years ago. We've come quite far, I think, over these last couple of years in terms of making up for the over-reliance of pipeline gas, but it's come at a cost. When you look at the prices, when you look at the industrial situation, what the high price environment did to that. So that for me really is, they've done well, but it's the cost really that's the concern. And we were lucky the last 2 winters have been mild, and we've seen the effect of milder weather on the gas prices recently. I think we look at the front month contracts, they're down almost 20% for January over recent weeks. But yeah, and conversely, you saw when we had as I mentioned, the low wind or Duncan-Flout or anti-cyclonic gloom that impacted renewable production. And again, gas prices, as we saw, completely rallied and then eased back down. But again, it's that fear factor that's been supporting the price. And again, that's because of the tightness and the fact we're now part of this global gas market. And we have to fight for these volumes in order to satisfy storage requirements, especially with the new guidelines in place and the challenges to fill that. And as I mentioned before to you, if you look at the sort of backwardation now in the front summer and winter.
Can you explain backwardation to those listeners?
Typically, for example, the summer contract would typically trade at a discount to the following winter, summer, less demand, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the typical market state or contango. What we've seen since the sort of end of October is a real switch in sentiment as then cold weather forecast kicked in and the prices started to rise. That force now the summer contract is trading above the winter contract, which disincentivizes injections into storage economically, of course. And that spread has actually moved a little bit of late, but it's still there. And if we look at the peak of it, the peak of the spread was sort of middle of November, sort of 20th of November, where it hit just over 4 euros per megawatt hour. It's now half that, but it's still at 2 euros per megawatt hour summer premium over winter. That tells you the market is still nervous. And if you look at the following, it's similar as well. So the market isn't convinced at the moment. But what's interesting is, I think I said this before, the way the market perceives sort of the winter now compared to a couple of months is quite different. We've had a couple of cold spells, but nothing major, no sustained cold spells. When those cold spells have come, and of course the low wind, we saw storages step in to fill that. Latest forecasts tell you January is not going to be as cold. So really, we've knocked off October, November. We're in December now, about to end it again. Look at the weather today. Here in London, it's still quite mild seasonally. So we've knocked off literally 3 months. If you add January, it could still change the weather. We know that. So you're talking, we've already knocked off almost 4 months of the winter. We've got February and March to come. So we would expect if February now turns mild, and I look at these sort of longer term forecasts, which still look like they could be quite mild. Our latest meteorologist forecast said relatively, mild, probably Q1. So if that does transpire, you'll start to see again, we're knocking off that risk. So we're reducing the risk premium. Spot prices just come down, so the spread should adjust. This has happened previously. If you look at last year, prices came off tremendously. I think they hit 25 euros at one point. Again, that was a surplus of LNG came in as well as the milder conditions. So Europe needs a repetition of that. And I think what we're seeing now at the moment is some sort of semblance of that. But if you look at the price movement, it's very hesitant to duck below 40. And at the moment, I think if you look at the Feb contract, Asia is the premium market. So again, if we do get into difficulties, we're going to have to lift that price again. And we saw when it went up to 48, 49, that's, we priced Asia out the market, and then you saw cargoes being diverted back to Europe. So again, we can give the signals, but the signal now is we're kind of okay, but the spread tells you that we're not convinced yet. So
the market is still quite jittery.
Jittery is the word I would use. Jittery on any news, and you've seen the fake news of previously knocked off 7%. And so we've seen all these, the market is still quite jittery around what's going to happen. Like I said, we've still got 3 months of winter to navigate, although 1 month at the moment looks like the month of January looks like it could be a little bit milder.
In the past, when, we've seen the beast from the east coming in February.
Exactly. So we're far from out the woods, and that's accurately reflected in this current state of backwardation we're seeing in the front 2 seasons.
But what are your expectations then? If I can put you on the spot a bit here, Wayne, where do you think we'll be in terms of prices in Q1?
Well, I'm using we just published our monthly report for January, and what we look at is we look at the storages now using our projections, and bear in mind we're looking at Northwest European storages here. We're looking at Germany, France, etc., Northwest Europe storages, and if we look at them now, we think the stocks would, end January at around 52%. Now, That's using our central scenario. Now, one interesting thing is if we look at our end of winter, start of summer forecast, we could see our central and cold scenarios, they could leave storages at 30% and 22% respectively, which, is very, very, way lower than last year. So that would be at around, we're looking at last year, the storage levels ended, in a nice ample position in the mid 50%. So if we look at that, that's quite bullish. It's only in our mild scenario, actually, where storages end fill all the way through to November 1st, 90% deadline. Only in our mild scenario are we allowed that. And that's taken into account all the supply-demand fundamentals, expectations based on now. As we know in these markets, things can change rapidly, especially, obviously, the weather. But our scenarios definitely point to more bullish at the moment, again, which is probably reflected in this premium that we're seeing in terms of summer over winter. And in terms of prices, we're kind of, in our base case scenario, sort of sideways bullish for January. Day ahead price probably around the 40, 41, where it's sort of sitting now. In our mild case scenario, we could probably see that day ahead price around the sort of 38 mark average throughout. This is throughout January. So again, the weather's having an impact, of course, as it does. And we saw that recently with these ever milder revisions, pushing the price lower and lower. And I was working on the morning report last week, and that kept happening.
But they're not dramatic price swings here. We're talking sort of 40 to 38 potentially.
No, not dramatic, because again, you need to have a certain price level to ensure that if this cold spell perhaps comes in February, then you need to lift the price. Or like you mentioned, beast from the east can come in March. Could see a cold April. So there's a few factors still that can impact this. But as it stands at the moment, if you look at these projections, and I've seen other people's projections as well, and I think we still have concerns. And again, I keep highlighting it, but that spread really, really highlights that concern in the market at the moment. And don't forget as well, we've had these, this year we've seen a lot of more interest from financial players. So you look at the latest traders report, you see changes there, and investment funds now really moving this market about. And we've seen that over recent weeks with some of the exaggerated moves and then the bounce back. So that's also been a sort of interesting factor this year for me.
It's all about the weather event in a way, isn't it? I mean, that's what it boils down to. And we've seen what happens when there is no wind, when there is at night, when, there's a lack of solar and wind generation, as well as, slightly colder temperatures. That caused panic, not panic, I would say, but certainly caused prices to absolutely skyrocket.
Yearly highs.
Yearly highs. And multi-year highs for some hours, for example, in Germany, for power anyway.
Power was, super bullish.
Absolutely. So in terms of, Andres mentioned it in the scene setter, I also have reflected on it. And in terms of Germany, we've had in politics, there's political chaos in France and Germany. There's elections in Germany coming up. Do you think that will have any impact on gas and on the gas, sort of global gas market?
I think the one impact I was going to mention, obviously, was you look at the storage level, it looks like that's going to be abolished now, which is good news, certainly good news. I think in terms of, that is some big change in terms of political. They've been quite green in Germany. How will this new coalition or the new government, how will that work? So there is, slight concerns around that. There's also with France, I mean, that again is a quite difficult situation. But again, I see more of an impact. You see more of an impact from the German side on the market than the French side, personally. But again, these geopolitical concerns will continue to provide some volatility. But of late, it's been mainly a fundamental-driven market, which we like, I think.
Absolutely. So we keep an eye on the weather and on what happens with Trump, the hand grenade.
And of course, let's not forget, what's going to happen post December 31st in terms of the flows, Russian flows, transit flows via Ukraine.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you can, have peace and quiet when you're talking to your Christmas dinner, Wayne. There's certainly a lot to keep an eye on in the coming weeks.
Indeed.
Thank you very much for being a guest on the Montel Weekly Podcast.
You're welcome.